We have Shepherd Sunday. Shepherds, as you know, care for their sheep. And there's goat herds and all those other kinds of things. Shepherds, we usually think of David and others, and it's an image used widely. The New Testament mainly was talking about Jesus Christ as the great shepherd because people could relate to that kind of image. We have a few sheep herders in Cedarburg. I know of a few that still tend sheep. Whether or not, I don't think they go great distances to find greener pastures. But that's one of the things they did, not only keep the sheep safe from harm, with their shepherd's crook guiding them, beating off wolves or coyotes or whatever animals that might take their sheep. They needed to build pens at night so they could keep their sheep safe, and they usually slept in front of the door so the sheep couldn't get out or nothing could get in to attack the sheep. And another thing, I hadn't thought about this so much, but the shepherd is also responsible for leading the sheep from one pasture that's been grazed over. And if you've had sheep, they graze it pretty darn low. So you got to get them moving, otherwise they'll kill the grass. You move them to greener pastures, and sometimes it's quite a walk to go from one pasture to another, especially in a land that might be arid. Now, we think of our pastures when we worked on the farm as kids. You know, the dairy farms, we had rolling hills, we had greenery everywhere. It didn't take much. You follow the little beat-out paths that the cows seem to take to different pastures, and at night you'd see them coming single file or whatever back for milking in the barns or whatever. But it was also greener pastures. And what do we mean by greener pastures? Food and nutrients, and they could lounge there for the day in the nice sun if it was sunny out. If they found green pasture, they could be there for a few days, but then after a while they'd need to move on to something else, to keep moving. And the shepherd's job was not easy at all. He had to keep watch in more ways than one, almost tirelessly. Day offs, there weren't any day offs. Hired hands, yeah, they don't have quite the same kind of feeling for the sheep that the shepherd does. The hired hand can come and go, but the shepherd had a vested interest. They had skin in the game. They wanted to make sure their sheep were safe because it was a profit or loss. If you lost sheep, you know your numbers go down. Your profit goes down. As we have a God that leads us to greener pastures, almost every single funeral that I've ever done has read Psalm 23 at one point or another, either in the funeral service or ceremony itself or out at the graveside, because it's so powerful. We see this God who is described as a shepherd, who cares, who leads into greener pastures, who protects us and sets table in front of enemies. We have this Jesus who lays down his life so that the sheep might live. And not simply that, but also rise again so the sheep might live even more fully. And now we think about this as, the shepherd being God, Jesus, and the sheep being us, too. And Jesus charges us as the sheep to take a look at what the shepherd does and try to follow suit if we can. Not only protect, which we can do pretty well, but also provide food and nutrients and those things which help others live to greener pastures, whatever we define that to be. The other night we watched a documentary in Guatemala, and it reminded me of the time that we were there in Guatemala. The conditions there, they don't have concrete floor in their huts. No, dirt. They didn't really have much of a roof, and they didn't have much of walls, and they had a small space for a lot of people. And the drinking water, you saw them, a tube coming down the mountain, and they're filling this can of water. Well, 80% of the water is polluted in Guatemala, so there's a big problem. How do we help lead the sheep, our friends, to greener pastures, to a better way of life? To not necessarily saying that they need all the technology and all the goodies that we have, but to have a more meaningful life. If you ask some of our friends in other countries, maybe even third world countries, what their life was like, and are they happy, and they may say, yes, we're very happy. In fact, sometimes they're happier than we are, who have abundance of things or overabundance of things. We have to define what greener pastures are. But part of the shepherd's work is to lead. And we as co-creators, that's kind of a careful term, but we also assist in helping others to find their green pastures, whatever we can. We saw a temple talk on the water packs to help our friends in Africa carry water safely from one place to another. We saw the malaria project to help our friends. 3.3 billion, that's half the world's population. Help our friends stave off a disease that can kill many, many children and many, many people. We take steps, small incremental steps sometimes, to lead our friends and help walk the way with our friends to greener pastures. Because that's the nature of God. And we like to try to do what we see God or Jesus has done and try to follow suit if we can. Sometimes it's not a huge project, but sometimes it's very small steps to get where we need to go, where God would like us to go. We think of our friends in Nepal, another earthquake in this world, 7.9 on the Richter, 1,200 people dying or dead because of this earthquake in another land. How do we help? We may not be able to send volunteers because it may be a glut of volunteers, but we figure out ways of helping. There are ways to help that we can. Sometimes monetarily, sometimes micro loans to businesses in some other places. Whatever it takes to make the pastures a little bit more green. And for our sakes too, how long do we stay in a nice green pasture until it's already been overgrazed? And how do we know if it's been overgrazed? Sometimes the Lord is pushing us to find greener pastures, to try something new, to fill our lives with something new that we'll get nutrients and rich foods. The Lord provides us with a musical every spring to provide a different way of seeing the gospel through song and movement and action and words. We have things that come into our lives, into this congregation, new things, new kinds of pastures for us, so that we don't suffer from complacency, that we can continue to move from pasture to pasture in a sense. Because God is able to lie down and die for us so that we may live. It is God who has the power and authority to do that. And we trust that God does that. And we trust that God will continue to do that in our lives. Because God is the great shepherd. Amen.